I've always considered myself an adaptable guy, the sort you can plop into any job, and I'll figure it out. So when I found the gig at the storage facility that was conveniently not mentioned in polite conversation, I shrugged off the peculiar glances my friends gave me after I announced where I'd be working. The pay was decent, particularly with the night differential, nothing that could make me wealthy, but enough to shut down nagging debts and afford a slightly less pathetic studio apartment. My first shift required a bone-deep acceptance of the cold. Rule one of the place, Stan, the weathered supervisor with a consistent cough and a limp, handed down to me alongside a too-thick jacket that had fur inside the hood. Never think you can tough out the temperatures. This cold will chew through your pride and spit out frostbite. The place was a hulking structure, shrouded in more shadows than light, its outer walls slick with the residue of every harsh winter it had faced. It smelt oddly sweet sometimes, which confused me because this was a place for fish, meat, and blood, not sugar and spice. That should have been my first clue. Nothing was as straightforward as it appeared. Inside, the chill seeped into my bones, a cold that seemed to sizzle against my skin like it was bitter about my presence. Warehouses are large and impersonal, yet every corridor seemed crowded with hidden watchers. The rows of towering shelves filled with boxes felt like silent sentinels, keeping secrets rather than goods. Stan grumbled through the basics, inventory checks, loading procedures, cleanup routines. Then he threw in the oddities with a grunt that suggested these were more irritants than regulations. If you hear knocking, don't knock back. No good ever comes from making friends with echoes, he said, his eyes briefly flickering with something I'd later call fear. Night shifts stretch and yawn with time, each hour thinning towards boredom or madness. Occasionally, the electric hum from the overhead lights would pause, as if catching its breath, plunging the storage into a suffocating silence. Whenever this happened, the cold deepened, clawing my spine more insistently. It's during these stretches I'd hear the knocking, a whimsical rhythm, like a distracted person's fingers against wood, but distant and close all at once. Halfway through what I decided was officially the longest shift in human history, I took up Stan's offer of unofficial breaks. Hiding away in the break room with a raggedy magazine and lukewarm tea from a machine that definitely spat out more dust than flavor. But at least it was warm. Maybe 2 pages into trawling through an article about conspiracy theories, which no longer felt purely recreational considering my location, I stopped. Outside, past the reassuring hum of the faulty vending machine, I heard something dragging. It was a slow, deliberate screech, like heavy furniture meeting an unyielding floor. I froze, tea halfway to my lips, and listened. The dragging would stop, followed by a sharp tap, like a declaration. I counted several of these before curiosity overrode common sense. I wandered the corridors, the sound guiding me like a grotesque lighthouse. As I turned the corner towards loading Dock B, the less used one, always locked up according to Stan, a sudden drop in temperature made the hairs on my arms salute. The heavy metallic door, supposedly always locked, was slightly ajar, groaning softly from a nudge of wind or something else. Pushing the door open, I peered in, my breath misting instantly in the air, framing my vision with frost. The room was dim, the only light slipping in from the crack beneath the door from the opposite end. And there, by the far wall, was an old radio. It was inexplicably on, the static broken intermittently by a voice, so low it was nearly swallowed by the hisses. Out, can't get out. The words were chillingly clear in their desperation. As I moved closer, the floor beneath me felt crunchier, odd since every surface in this place was solid and unyielding. I clicked my flashlight on, angling it towards my feet, and then I saw them, fish scales, scattered like bizarre confetti all the way to the closed door across the room. That was enough curiosity for one night. I backed out of the room, not daring to take my eyes off the still murmuring radio until I was safely down the corridor. The cold whispering threats into my ears about things hidden in the dark, desperate to be found, desperate to escape. I reached the safety of my own room, the door clicking shut with a sound that seemed abnormally loud in the muted darkness. Breathing heavily, I leaned against it, closing my eyes for a moment. I could still hear the faint hiss and crackle of the radio in my mind, the murmur like a chanting crowd dead set on sharing secrets no sane ear should hear. I shook the sensation, telling myself it was just an old electronic device malfunctioning, nothing more. The need for reassurance led me to double-check the lock on my door. Secured. Despite this, a niggling unease remained, worming its way into my stomach. The night outside my window was thick and oppressive, layering every shadow in my room with a velveteen cover of doubt and fear. I retreated to my bed, pulling the covers up to my chin as if they could shield me from whatever lay beyond the walls of my once comforting sanctuary. But no matter how I tried positioning myself, the pillow felt too lumpy, the mattress too hard. Eventually, I turned on my bedside lamp, squinting against the abrupt invasion of light. Glancing around, my eyes fell upon a book on my nightstand. An ordinary object, yet tonight, it seemed a lifeline to normality. I snatched it up, heart still thudding painfully against my chest, and began to read. Concentrating on the words helped filter out the lingering voices of the radio, grounding me back to a world of concrete and rational problems. But as I read, a different sound trickled into my consciousness, so faint at first that I mistook it for my imagination. A scratching, soft, insistent. It was coming from the window. My heart stilled. The logical part of my brain urged calm, suggesting branches or some small animal. Yet the evening had been still. There hadn't been enough wind to stir the leaves, let alone the more robust limbs of trees. Slowly, hesitantly, I placed the book down and turned my gaze towards the window. The curtains obscured the view, their fabric seemingly darker than the shadows they blocked. I held my breath, listening, waiting. The scratching paused, then continued, more purposeful now. I told myself not to look, to ignore it and return to my book. But the sound seemed to grow louder with my trepidation, more demanding. Gathering every shred of courage, I slid from under the safety of my covers and moved towards the window. Each step felt like wading through treacle, heavy and reluctant. My hand trembled as it reached out, grasping the curtain. With a sharp inhalation, I pulled it back. Nothing but the glass of the window met my eyes, reflecting back the pale, disturbed image of my face. But the scratching continued, louder now, as if mocking my fear. It was then I realized it was coming from inside the walls. Panic gripped me, a cold hand around the heart. What manner of thing lived in the walls of my home? The slow creaking groan of the house settling suddenly sounded ominous, like the stirring of something large, something awake. I backed away from the window, unable to tear my eyes away from the walls themselves. And then a new noise, the radio. Not the soft murmuring I had left behind, but a clear, loud static that erupted through the silence of the house. I froze, the sound drilling into my ears, each burst of static making my skin jump. Without thinking, I found myself moving towards the source of the sound, drawn by a need to understand, to stop it if possible. As I approached, the static fluctuated, wavered, and then, from within the white noise, words formed, stark and undeniable. You should not have listened. The declaration hung in the air, the finality causing a chill to spiral down my spine. I stood before the radio, the voices now silent, replaced by my own heavy breathing. The message was clear, chillingly personal. I should not have listened, but I had, and now something had listened back. As I stood in the dim hallway, a shadow moved at the edge of my vision. My gaze snapped sideways, catching nothing but the lingering doubt that now filled every corner of my home. What had I invited in? What had I set free? Hands shaking, limbs heavy with dread, I understood that the night was far from over, and neither was the horror. The whispering threats weren't just in my mind, they were all around, alive and hungry. The walls seemed to close in, the shadow's motion lingering like a stain in my eyes. Every creak and groan of the aging house now felt like a sinister whispering coming from the mouths of hidden specters. I stepped lightly, my socks muffling the sound of my movement, paranoid that anything louder might invoke something worse. I made my way toward the living room, the earlier scene of unexplained phenomena where a vase had shattered without provocation, its pieces still littering the floor untouched since my retreat. As I approached, the air grew perceptibly colder, my breath turning visible, puffing out in frantic little clouds. I paused at the threshold, heart hammering against my ribs so violently it might as well have been trying to escape outright. A low hum filled the room, oscillating with a rhythm that felt both random and intentional. Shadows danced across the walls, cast by the flickering light of the single lamp I had left on, its light bulb now dimmer, its filament hissing softly. My eyes darted around, trying to source the movements, but they seemed to be born from the corners themselves, breeding spots for the inexplicable. The sofa, an overstuffed relic covered in floral patterns, seemed to undulate subtly, its fabric rippling under unseen fingers. I stepped back, bumping into the hallway wall, my skin crawling as if ants marched over me. This was no mere trick of the light or the product of an overstressed mind. The room felt alive, responsive, and malignantly aware. With a swell of desperate courage, or perhaps foolishness, I whispered into the gloom, "What do you want?" The words felt heavy in the air, like dropping stones into a still pond. The humming ceased abruptly. Silence crashed down, so dense it was its own form of noise, pressing against my eardrums. Then, from the direction of the kitchen, a single, clear sound shattered the stillness, a glass sliding across the countertop. I inched forward, compelled by a mix of dread and an overwhelming need to know. As I passed the living room, avoiding the gaze of the rippling couch, I entered the kitchen. The air was spiced with the smell of rot, a stark contrast to the usual lemon-scented cleaner I used. My throat tightened, bile rising. There on the counter, the glass continued its slow, deliberate journey across the surface, leaving a moist trail behind it. It stopped at the edge, teetering precariously. I reached out, a part of me still disbelieving, just as the glass tipped over the edge. Reflexively, I caught it, the cold of the glass biting into my palm. As soon as my skin made contact, a rush of images flooded my mind. Flashes of events, places, and screaming faces I did not recognize, all infused with profound terror. Dropping the glass, I staggered back, pressing my hands to my temples as if I could physically keep the horrors at bay. I needed to get out. The house, this entity, it was too much. It knew too much. Darting back to the hallway, I made for the front door, fumbling with locks and bolts that felt unusually stiff, as though resisting. Finally, the door swung open, the night air cool and welcoming. But as I stepped out, a child's laughter echoed from the upper floor of the house, chillingly clear, compelling in its innocence, yet horribly out of place. My legs froze, my entire body wavering on the doorstep, torn between the sanctuary of the night and the abyssal pull of that laugh. Why was this happening? What link did I unknowingly serve between this malevolent presence and the world it so hungrily distorted? With a shaky inhale, I turned back. The laughter beckoned not just my body but something deeper, intertwined with the very fibers of my being. I stepped inside, locking the door behind me, the familiar click sounding more like a sentence being passed. My flashlight gripped tightly, I began the ascent up the stairs, each step creaking underfoot like an accusation. At the top, the hallway stretched into darkness, punctuated only by the occasional flash of movement, or maybe, just maybe, a figment of my fraught imagination. The laugh sounded again, closer now, a taunting, sing-song melody that seemed to pull at my very soul. I moved forward, each step heavier than the last, drawn inexorably to a fate I could neither anticipate nor avoid. I moved forward, each step heavier than the last, drawn inexorably to a fate I could neither anticipate nor avoid. The walls of the narrow corridor seemed to pulse with a sick, damp rhythm, like the slow beat of an anxious heart. In the scant light, shadows clung to the edges of my vision, shifting, twisting, almost taunting. I could no longer tell if they were mere tricks of my mind or something more sentient, more malevolent. My flashlight flickered, a stutter in its beam that sent a surge of panic up my spine. I tapped it against my palm, a useless gesture born of desperation. The light steadied, but my relief was short-lived. The air grew colder, the drop in temperature sharp enough to draw a shiver from my already tense body. As I rounded a corner, the narrow beam of my light fell upon a door. Not just any door, but the door, the very end of my relentless pursuit through this godforsaken place. It stood slightly ajar, an invitation or perhaps a dare. My breath caught in my throat, each inhale sharp against the cold air. The wood of the door was old, peeling, with dark stains that spoke of long-ago horrors. I pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest. The room beyond was shrouded in darkness, deeper than anything I had encountered before. My flashlight seemed feeble against it, the beam swallowed whole just a few feet beyond the threshold. I stepped inside, my heart hammering against my ribs, fighting the overwhelming urge to flee. The air was thick, heavy with the stench of mold and something else, something cloying and sweet, a scent that made my stomach churn. I swept the room with my light, revealing little by little the horrors it contained. The walls were lined with old, decaying books, their pages yellowed and curling. But it was what lay in the center of the room that drew my eyes and held a figure, or what used to be a figure, sat propped against a chair that seemed as old and decrepit as the rest of the contents. Its features were indistinct, obscured by decay and shadow, yet there was an undeniable sense of watching, of being observed by some remnant of what once was. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my instincts screaming at me to turn away, to leave this cursed place and never look back. But something held me fast, a morbid fascination, perhaps, or the horrifying realization that the fate I had been moving toward was now at my feet. I edged closer, each step tentative. The figure's head was bowed, its hands resting on what looked like a diary. Curiosity overpowered my fear. I reached out, trembling, and took the book, my fingers brushing against what felt like leather but was far too cold, too smooth. The moment my skin touched the diary, the air shifted. Pressure built around me as if the room itself was closing in. I flipped the book open, the pages rustling softly under my fingers. The ink was faded, but legible, a scrawled account of days and deeds so dark, so twisted, they seemed to bleed horror into the very air. I was engrossed, trapped in the retelling of this ghastly history when I heard it, a whisper, so faint I thought I'd imagined it. "Don't read," it breathed, a sigh more than a voice. I froze, my eyes darting around the shadow-drenched room. "Don't read," it came again, closer this time, desperate, urgent. I snapped the diary shut, heart racing. The room felt smaller, the shadows denser. The temperature dropped further, a cold that seeped into my bones, slowing my movements, fogging my breath. I backed away slowly, intent on reaching the safety of the corridor. But as I turned, my flashlight flickered once more, this time going out completely, surrendering me to the oppressive darkness. I staggered blindly, my hands outstretched, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. Then, in the suffocating blackness, I felt it, a slight disturbance in the air, like a breath on the back of my neck. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. A low, mournful groan filled the room, a sound of agony and endless despair. My own scream was stifled in my throat, a silent echo to the darkness that consumed me. I knew then that the room, and whatever remnants of soul haunted it, would not let me leave, not easily. And as if responding to my realization, I heard the door behind me creak slowly shut, sealing me in with the quiet, insidious whisper, "Now you are part of the story."